Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our weekly walkthrough of Robert B. Davis's second book, Purpose in Form: The Necessary Basis of All Ethics. And in today's episode, we are going through chapter 17, Creator, No Creator, One Cause, No Cause. How are you doing today, Rob?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing very well. Weather is having I think some sort of an existential crisis right now. It doesn't know if it wants to be in the 30s or back up in the 70s. So we're just kind of bebopping, bing bonging around in the temperatures. Kind of volatile, but I think it's trending downwards. I think we're getting colder.
Yep.
Yeah. Alrighty, Rob. So if you could kind of give us a starting point here on this chapter. I know it's kind of a shorter one, but there is a lot of information in here. What's going on in the chapter?
Yeah. So this again, we're in part three where we're sort of talking on the spiritual end, some pitfalls to sort of brush away or loose ends to tie up, or just sort of caveats to throw out there. So this one is about the hang up, a little bit of what Reza Aslan talked about in one of the previous chapters of, this idea of a unified essence of existence versus the idea of an embodied God separate from creation. And this is something that has sort of broader appeal, or should I say, it makes people question and makes people wonder, and it can cause people some hangups. And so the point of this chapter is to really focus on what is what is core and what is real and what is true, um, and what we have to sort of accept based on what we see and what we directly know. And I think um, through that, everything that's retained is really, I don't know if I could say really all you need, but it's most of what you need. And so in that vein, this chapter presents the idea of the creator, a creator being this, definitively separate being with particular bounds, sitting in whatever, a particular chair somewhere outside creation, whatever that means. Already the language is part of the problem because we're talking about um, infinity beyond infinity and also involved within creations. Anyhow, outside of time and all that. So the point is, holding on super tightly to the idea of an old grandfather sitting in the sky, even if it's not the physical sky, it's the spiritual sky, whatever you want to say. Uh, this is something that causes problems on both ends, both of the people who really want it to, are really wed to that image, and then the people who find it troublesome run up against those people, and they both push against each other. It's like so the point of the chapter is relax about that. If you have gratitude and wonder and joy at the miracle of being, then you're probably okay with God. Like, I can't really speak for God, but like, if you are grateful for his creation, let's just say we believe in this external creator. If you're grateful for his creation, and you're trying to do good and be joyous within it and bring peace to the world and all that, then cool. Like, you're working with God. So if you, let's just say, so if you don't have that view of an external guy sitting out there, I don't think that's actually a big problem. It's a big problem when it goes hand in hand with, oh, there's no creator God, therefore all these negative conclusions that follow. But the whole book has been trying to not argue from authority, not say, oh, the big guy sitting in the throne told me that you have to abide by these things, but looking at sort of a natural law perspective and what we can discern based on our own senses and say, there is purpose in form, there is purpose in my life, and that is evident, and that carries with it a whole bunch of perspectives and directives. And so I think having all of that, it kind of makes this debate about the image a little bit superfluous. So anyhow, there's a quote here um, that I have actually from the Gospel of Thomas, but I think it's a good quote, and it I think encapsulates what I was sort of going for. So it starts off, Yeshua said, "If flesh came into being because of spirit, it is a wonder. But if spirit came into being because of flesh, it is a wonder of wonders. Yet the greatest of wonders is this: how is this being, capital B, being, how is this being which is, sorry, I misread that. How is it that this being which is inhabits this nothingness?" The being is capital and the is also capitalized there. So the idea of the sort of traditional idea of, well, there was spirit and that created the material. That's wonderful. That's miraculous. But the whole point of this is the depth of wonder that you don't actually have to lose. And so the other side is if spirit came into being because of flesh, that's the sort of the idea of the modernists that all of our mental processes are epiphenomena that come after the evolution of the physical bodies. Well, okay, but if you comprehend and understand the reality of that mental world and how alive and real it is, if that came into being because of materiality, that's just an even bigger miracle. That's crazy wondrous. And then it says this ultimate wonder is just that there is being, that existence exists, that being shines forth. It is, capital S is how it puts it there, uh, inhabiting this nothingness. In the midst of nothing, in the midst of infinity, where for all we know, there nothing ever had to exist. Existence exists. And that's, I think knowing that is the absolute depths of wonder. And so wonder can underlie everything. And as long as we're on the side of that wonder and gratitude, thankfulness um, and blessedness, then that's where we want to be.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted reading this first section of the chapter is, you know, creator, no creator. So it's one of the other. It's either you believe that there's God in the sky, floating on a cloud, as this external entity that is outside of you, that is watching down and maybe causing a couple lightning bolts here or there on occasion, or there's nothing. And it doesn't account for the interwoven nature that we've been discussing in this book of infinity and the finite, and how one is the other, how this finite experience is the infinite embodying the finite, and there's one, it's in tandem. And I think that the idea of the infinite leads into the awareness of the miraculous nature of existence. But at that point, it sometimes ends there, or the idea of understanding the infinite without maybe some overlying structure may lead into kind of an indifferent idea of or belief in the infinite, and therefore you can still be swayed into nihilism or atheism. But on the other coin of that, the belief in the infinite also leads way into the understanding that life is miraculous and that it is something to behold. There is that divine order with everything. Um, even in thinking of, okay, you don't believe that there's this external figure hanging off in a cloud in the sky, but like you said, you're embodying gratitude and love and compassion and all of these emotions and expressions that come along with the wonder of identifying reality as being miraculous. The other aspect of that too is embodying truth and virtue and morality and leading with integrity, and that falls in line as well. So it's like, just because you're not identifying with something that is outside of you, that is looking down, that integration of the infinite in a finite experience comes through those experiences of gratitude and virtue and truth. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm kind of playing with the idea, and in the chapter I'm using as a foil the work of Lawrence Krauss. He's a physicist. I think he's a physicist. He writes a book on physics. Um, and I think it's called A Universe from Nothing. It's been many years since I read it. And he's like a super atheist, like very outspoken throughout the book. I'm here for the physics, but you're going to get your dose of cynical atheism thrown in there too. But anyhow, it's just funny because the basic premise of his book is that, well, we have a universe that came out of nothing because, like, that's just what happens. Like, the nothingness that composes space is just constantly creating new things. Like, things just come out of nothing all the time. So, therefore, obviously, we have a universe because it's the nature of the nothingness to create things. And it's just like, I mean, I get that you're an atheist, but your basic premise is that there's a fertile void of infinite creativity that just constantly brings out miracles. Like
Right.
you say, well, it's not a miracle because it happens every moment. It's like, or we're surrounded by miracles every moment, like one or the other. I see less evidence for uh, the former. Is that right? Anyhow, so the idea that this goes along with what you're saying, like, well, either there's a God or there's nothing, but we're sure that we're here, right? There's something going on. We're in the midst of some sort of existence. So either there's a God who created it or it all came out of nothing. And those are sort of viewed as opposites. It's like, okay, fine. Let's get rid of the external creator. Let's say this all just popped out of nothingness. But then again, you have to have the idea of a fertility of that nothingness. Like the void has to be creative. Like that sort of goes against the idea of void, but the nothingness is inherently uber creative. And not only is it uber creative, it has the ability to create not just chaos, but pattern. And it has the ability to imbue purpose into a life. Because again, what we've discovered is that there is just undeniably purpose in our lives. And so if that just poofed into being out of nothingness, well, I don't really care if you don't think that there's a guy sitting out there. Like the nothingness is a wonderful creative source that intended us with purpose and gifted us with life and provides for us. And like the nothingness is the God in that. Like you just replace the name God with nothingness and you have the same exact point of view. So this is exactly where the perspective of this chapter is like, if you notice those things, then the distinction between those two is irrelevant. So whether you want to say just poof, no reason, we miraculously, spontaneously came out of nothing and we have all that we have out of that, okay, but we miraculously, spontaneously came out of nothing and we are patterned beings with purpose. Like, hallelujah. Like, that's amazing. That's a miracle. That's the only thing that goes away is this image of some person sitting off in a space doing the minute work of whatever, writing in a book or tinkering with the creation, whatever it is. And that's an allegorical image. Anyways, it's a beautiful image and it's a helpful image, but it's still just an allegorical image of how God created because we can't possibly comprehend how God created. He created miraculously. That's kind of the definition. So anyhow, that's essentially the entire point of this chapter.
That's exactly it, right? Is the identification that there is unlimited potential, and that although there are parameters that we have here, I mean there is order, there is that divine order, there's also that ability to create out of that potential, and that potential is God, is the infinite. And so you are bringing that through you and manifesting things in this reality, and that ties. See, and I know that that sounds woo woo, and that sounds like like new age,
Right.
but it's not because is you're tying it in with Christianity, and you're identifying the immense potential that God brings forth. If you're identifying and adopting an air of nihilism or kind of or atheism, where you're fully focused on the material, on the finite, and you're pigeonholing yourself in there, then okay, yes, that's completely disregarding and disagreeing with whatever it is, with our interpretation, with the beauty of life. But if you're identifying with that infinite potential, to me, that runs tandem with the conception of Christianity, on a religious level, as like you
Right.
said, uh, looking at something as an allegory, an interpretation of identifying with that infinite potential. Wouldn't it be the same thing? Because the allegory is just there to serve you with identifying with the underlying message and meaning held within the text.
Right, right. So it kind of goes back to the chapter we did on religious reading, and I think we titled it "The Letter Kills, but the Spirit Gives Life."
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, the word manifesting, like that's connected to, in our minds, it's connected to the sort of new agey stuff. But the word manifesting just means bringing forth, creating, and God created us to be creators.
Right.
Um, so it's really in the meaning behind the word that is the issue, not the in the word. There's nothing wrong with the word manifesting. Um, the 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 difference in meaning is if you're new age, you think that you are the you think that you are God and that you have the authority and ability to manifest whatever you want whenever you want, even though that's clearly not true and you know, whatever. Um, that's sort of the underlying mindset is like I'm gonna manifest money and sex and you know,
A
whatever it
Lambo.
is.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Lamborghini.
Right, yeah. Um, and so manifesting in that sense is bad, but it's bad because the meaning that you're putting on it, where you think of yourself as like the awakened, uh, what would you say, player, not the opposite of an NPC who can input the cheat codes whenever they want and get whatever they want out of it. Like then all of the rest of reality is the infinite holodeck to fulfill your fantasies, and you are essentially the highest creator with the best knowledge of what should happen when. That's bad manifesting, and partially, not least because it's just simply not true and not how it works. Um, but you could also say, well, I'm manifesting in the sense that I have these hopes, desires, drives, and I'm trying to create out of them as God has directed me. And I'm trying to stay in line with his will and do his will as much as possible and let go of the things that are taking me away from that. And I am, in that sense, bringing forth what is invisible, what is just potential, what is just in my imagination, and creating it in the world. And that does happen, you know, that doesn't just happen mechanically. Like we don't just make things happen. For example, I've written a book. Great. I've done all the little boops of the keys in the board and went through the process of editing it, and I put it out there in the world. But I didn't sell a million copies overnight just because I felt like it. There's a line in the Bible, man, what is it? Man plants and waters, but God giveth the increase. It's like there's a point where your creation, sometimes at the end, sometimes it's intermixed and in between. But there are things that are input into your creation that are not just your physical, mechanical putting together of the things. So there's a spiritual aspect to it, and things do come together mysteriously and stack on top of each other. And so there is this element of magic again, not bad word magic, but like miraculousness. There's this element of um, yeah, spiritual manifesting that is happening. Yeah, just
Yeah.
don't do it demonically, but you're supposed to be doing God's will, and you're supposed to be being a creator, and some aspect of all, if not, or most, if not all creations are is mysterious and miraculous and manifesty.
Yeah. I think of like, your point of the book. So I mean, you essentially transmuted what were concepts and ideas and beliefs through the beep boops on the keyboard into the words on the screen, and then through the printer to then bring forth this collection of those concepts and beliefs and ideas. So at one point, these were ethereal that
Mhm.
has then been manifested into a literal object, and I think of like a cook or somebody like a baker, right? It's like if you're going to bake cookies, if your end result is a cookie, you have to then take all of these unassociated ingredients, put them together, do some alchemy, some chemistry, raise some heats, move things around, increase
Mhm.
temperatures, decrease temperatures, and then eventually you get a cookie. But then that cookie wouldn't be there unless it went through the process of you. It's
Right.
that. So
And we don't think of that as miraculous
right,
because people have been doing that for thousands of years. But
right,
especially the ease at which we have it today is crazy because all the flour is pre-processed and ground somewhere else. We don't have to have
right.
a stone mill going somewhere in the town to get the meal. And, it's all sifted very nicely. And, the oils are pure and like all that's taken care of for us. We just have to go to the store and like pour it together, and it's like a little Lego set. It's just, all pre-packaged and made for you there. But just when you see like the historical process, it gives you, I think, some um, perspective on like how crazy this is that we're able to do these things. Like we don't think of it now, but it is quite miraculous to take the raw ingredients of the world. Like, flour is not a white powdery substance that you go find out there. It's plant ears with a bunch of extra things on it that you don't need, and you have to grind them up and sift them out and stuff. And sugar isn't, you don't just mine these things and find piles of them. You have to purify them and extract them and all that sort of stuff. So it's far more complicated than we normally think of it.
It is looking at it that way of like the ease of access of going to a store, but then even the ease of people take out the miraculous aspect by saying like, okay, I'm just following the directions on the box.
Right.
But you have the potential to really screw it up, and I think that's the other thing too, and that brings forth the fallibility of humanity and also the causal nature of things where let's say in your mind you're conceiving of this incredible cookie, and then all your coworkers are going to love it, and all of your, everybody's going to have a great time. And so you go through the ropes through that manifestation process of bringing forth the ingredients and developing the cookie. And at, the end result, you have uh, a crisp disc that is a poor resemblance of what would be a digestible cookie. And so then you get hard, you get beat down and you're like, oh, I just suck, man. This isn't gonna work. Or do you retry? And the beauty of that is that sometimes it doesn't work out, right? Your conception of what the outcome of things are gonna be doesn't always come out the way you think it does. And I'll go back to and I say that it's a good thing that that's the case. And I'll bring another point to where, you had said that we don't look at things as being miraculous because we just go through the motions of following the directions and we just think that we're a robot that's just doing these actions. There's incredible beauty in that because nonetheless, regardless of you following another person's directions, you're still bringing that forth. You are still the arbiter of bringing that forth without, let's say, your own level of expression.
Mhm.
But once you do have the ability to add that signature level of expression of your own creativity into it, even if things don't turn out the way that you conceived of it, nonetheless, it's a miracle because you are the one that created the end result through your desire to bring something forth to manifest something. And so I think that's a really good thing.
Well, I was also thinking about, you know, my house is all of appliances and stuff run on electricity, and you need an oven to make a cookie. And I was just thinking, like, what would like just try describing like electricity to someone who's they just they have cooking but they use fire, and someone
Right.
before electricity, and it's like, well, I don't ever have to light a fire in my house. The city just sends me some of their fire through a rope in the sky. And they're just like, so they light a rope on fire and it goes to your house and lights your fire. But then the rope, you have to replace the rope all the time. No, no, the rope's not on fire. They just send the fire through the rope.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Like, there's a rope up, there's a normal rope up there. No, it's not normal. If you touch it, you'll explode. Like,
Right.
what? Like, how are we sending fire across miles without actually having fire across those miles? And then it just comes into my house and heat like that it's crazy. Like, this is wild magic that's going on here. And we just take it for granted.
And I think about that, and not to get too off topic, but I think about the incredible timeline that is humanity. We look back at the discovery of fire and we're like, okay, wow, that kind of had a big impact on, our direction. But then we don't really take into account the importance of discovering and harnessing electricity, like because it was so new, like in the span of humanity, that was yesterday. So
Right.
so we can't even fully conceive of what the adoption of this is going to bring forth. It's like it's its own thing. It's just, and we're of course we're seeing it. I mean, we've had it from one, Benjamin Franklin with his kite in the air, a few hundred years ago,
Yeah.
and now here we are with this incredible level of technology. So you're right. You're trying to explain this to somebody a couple hundred, years ago, you wouldn't be able to conceive it. And just through that progression of technological advancement and achievement, it almost seems otherworldly to somebody from the past. But today we take it completely for granted,
Mhm.
completely for
Yeah.
granted.
Yeah. So maybe just to tie that back in, the the attitude I was sort of addressing, talking about Lawrence Krauss there. I really found like the epitome of that quite late, only within the last couple of years, but in David Hume. Basically, he rejected he has a really compelling and well done essay on miracles, and I quote it in the book, and I think he has the last intellectual word on it to be sure. And he's totally right. Like it's more likely that someone's lying to you than that a miracle occurred in terms of evaluating it from a skeptical point of view, for sure, 100%. But he has this particular point where he talks about how he's addressing sort of the that wondrous conception of like when we look at things and we wonder about like, wow, how crazy is this that it's really going on? And people would point to that stuff in the natural world. And so the argument he addresses is talking about how an acorn grows into a tree. And this was actually kind of a common image of like how there is purpose in a life and it knows what it's going to do and becomes what it's going to be through this mysterious miracle. And Hume looked at this, and his response from like the atheist perspective was essentially, yes, it's true that we have no idea how an acorn transforms into an oak tree. Uh, Maybe a better way to say that, we have no idea why an acorn. Well, anyhow, the point is, because you could give an evolutionary teleological reason, but the point is like we can describe the processes, we can break them down and analyze them and describe them, but in a certain sense, we still have no idea why there are trees and why there are acorns that went into a tree. Like why, and this really reflects the idea of why is there something rather than nothing at the base.
Mm.
But anyhow, the point is, he looked at this argument and he said, well, yes, we have no idea how an acorn goes into an oak tree. Um, but it doesn't matter because it happens all the time, and therefore it's not a miracle. His point was it's happening every day, whether we know how it happens or not, so it can't be miraculous. And I think that's kind of very revealing about that point of view of like, well, if it's just happening all the time, it can't possibly be a miracle. And again, it's like, or there are miracles happening all the time every day. Like,
It's like it's
yeah,
like somebody if let's say you've been breathing your whole life and all of a sudden you
right,
stop breathing for 3 minutes and somebody revives you and brings you back and you start breathing again. It's like, okay, well, that wasn't a miracle because before he stopped breathing, he was breathing for his whole life. And so
right,
it's right. So you have a tendency to not identify the beauty and the
right.
miraculous nature of life because it's unfolding before you. It's like we were
Mhm.
saying, every moment. But because you can break down moments in a measurement of time, and you can say, oh wow, I have a lot of moments. Therefore, because there's so many of them, they're unimportant.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
not a
Right.
miracle.
And there's sort of a modern version of that that I come across recently of uh, like we've begun to recognize, sort of collectively, cancer has been a huge problem forever, or not forever, for the last, 50 to 100 years. And now we're sort of starting to realize is that actually most people have a bunch of cancer throughout their whole lives. The cancer that we talk about is the cancer that gets through the collective action of our immune system and healing factor of our bodies to whatever extent that exists, and however it works. So there are cases of like full-blown tumors that have been caught and identified medically that go into spontaneous remission. There are also cases underlying our notice that we just have little bits of cancer that are constantly defeated by our bodies and gotten rid of. And so that growing knowledge pushes some people to say, well, you know, spontaneous healings are not miraculous because they happen all the time. And it's like, or we have miraculous bodies that have miraculous healings all the time. Like,
Right.
anyway, it ties into this idea of, or that ties into this idea of, a miracle has to be something inexplicable or whatever. But, I'm sort of going on the idea of wonder, not inexplicability. You can explain something and see how it works and still be like, this is amazing.
Right.
So I think that. brings it back together there.
I think this would be a really good opportunity then to segue into an essay that you wrote that's available on your website. I believe it's available as a Substack.
It's
Or is
not on
it-
Substack, it's on my
It's not on
website.
Substack. Okay, it's just on that website. And it ties in with it's called superheroes versus utilitarianists, right?
Mhm.
And it deals with the idea that we've been talking about of either viewing the creator as being this external entity on the cloud, um, or that you and the creator are interwoven, that you're having that infinite meeting the finite experience. And I think that you do a really good job in doing that with conveying, let's say, what a specific author would kind of convey in creating a character such as a superhero. So if you could kind of take over with that and just kind of explain what the point of that story is of superheroes versus utilitarianists.
Well, I'll say just it's kind of after the fact that these two are we're relating these two. So I think the closest where they touch is the idea that, if you're watching a movie or reading a book that's just amazing, there's sort of this sense that like the story is more real than the author. Like you know, you don't really think about the director of the movie unless you sort of trained yourself to do that and you're interested in whatever directors, comparing directors' styles and whatnot. But if you're just absorbing a story, you and it's a good story, you don't typically think so much about the director and the author, and hopefully that's the author's intention as well. Um, and you really only run into that when there's some part of the story that doesn't sell you. And you think, well, that just happened because they needed to get from A to B and they made a clunky story decision. So the idea here is like, we can see that there's a story, a movie, or whatever. There's an unfolding patterned event with a purpose and a goal. And from that, that entails things like it implies an author, but it has this valence of like, you can forget about the author to some degree, and but you still have the end result, the performance. And so if you really think about that, that sort of pushes you back to the idea of an author. So that's sort of connecting to the creator, no creator, or somewhat two sides of the same coin, just depending on how you're looking at it, how you're defining it. But the purpose of the essay, as I was writing it, was thinking about the popular stories that we tell in our culture as are myths, and that's obviously not a thought original to me. That's something that Joseph Campbell and Young and many others and people before had started doing, but just straightforwardly looking at the popular superhero movies. This was written right after Endgame came out. Or no, sorry, I think I wrote it right after Infinity War came out. But the Marvel saga was the most popular thing at the time. And so I was just looking at the ideas of superheroes and them embodying the characteristics, or let's say it this way, the the characteristics that they embody implicitly state that those are the characteristics we value as a society. And so I saw this just juxtaposition where superheroes were very anti-utilitarian in everything they did. And in that movie, Thanos is essentially the like utilitarian. He is a utilitarian. Like he embodies utilitarian philosophy. And so I had seen utilitarianism as a philosophy is viewed um, fairly favorably. It gets a lot of attention and people like it for varying degrees, even though there's harsh criticism and those people who don't like it are like, no, absolutely not. There are people who are fans of it. And so it was interesting to see in our mythology in the stories we're presenting and the stories that people love, utilitarianism is being portrayed as the ultimate bad guy, and our superheroes are completely anti-utilitarian. And so I thought I would just do a sort of movie analysis from that perspective of how should we think about utilitarianism? What's the problem with utilitarianism? And then what is the anti-utilitarianism thing that the characters are doing? What is the virtue that they embody that is puts them as the opposite of utilitarianism?
And so we can identify these we can identify with these superheroes because of the ideals that they have, right? They're vessels that kind of bring forth uh virtues and morals, and they're kind of they're people. You see kids dress up for them as Halloween. These are traits and characteristics that we want to see within ourselves, and I think that's where the identification comes in with these superheroes. It's not the fact that they can swing from building to building or have a skeleton made of adamantium. It's the fact
Mm,
that they're willing to lay their lives down for the greater good, and they're willing to uphold certain virtues and characteristics despite overwhelming odds. And then that ties in as well with as they seem to embody these traits and characteristics, the story always seems to unfold in their favor. And
mhm,
you make the point of, they're usually up against a decision of save the girl or save the bus full of innocent people, or
mhm.
it's always a one or the other, but somehow they're always able to pull it off where both are saved. And that's
Yes.
through taking an extremely unlikely and risky move, where it seems that something outside of themselves is aiding in that process. And that's what we were just discussing. And there's no way that could have happened. Like there, of course, that was written in so the character could succeed. And that may be true. That is true. But then you could also attribute that to your life. Well, have you noticed that when you are resonating and amplifying good behavior, that things have a tendency to kind of ease into place, and fall into place. And then it is only when, let's say, you do not get that affirmation of, okay, well, this didn't work out in my favor, so therefore being a good person isn't correct. So I'm going to start doing bad things and engage in poor behavior. And then all of a sudden things really don't work out for you, and you're like, ah, see, that's exactly what I thought. See, nothing works in my favor, and it just kind of
Mhm,
perpetuates that cycle. But on the other end, like we were discussing, you engage in good behavior, things have a tendency to work in your favor. And that shows that there is kind of that overarching author to all that is. You're not necessarily thinking of the director making the movie or the author writing down the words, but just by reading the words or watching the movie, you get that you are consistently seeing that confirmation that somebody created this material, and therefore simply just you don't see them, that they exist because you wouldn't be able to have that experience if they didn't exist.
mhm. Right, right. So the it's kind of funny because it works both ways. Like you can say, "Oh, that just happened because it's a movie that was just written in," and you can view that cynically, and oh, therefore that's not real. That wouldn't happen in real life. But my point in the essay is, it might actually happen in real life. Like you might actually have the author or the director write in some things that, you know, of course, God is a more perfect director, and so they tend to be more seamless. But the where was I going? The idea that you are like your story is not written in your favor. You know, again, we're back to we can't deny the fact that we have a story. So we're but it for whatever reason it seems to be um, Like the more cynical side would say, well, it's more likely that my story is not written in my favor than it is. But I mean, in reality, I think if you're honest, it's incredibly unlikely that you would have a story and you have a story. So why is it more likely that your story would be not in your favor than in your favor? Um, so anyhow, the going through a character's story with this idea that, well, if we just look at our stories the way they're told, like movies don't tell us anything. This is sort of, I quoted from Family Guy, where they sort of lampooned this when they did a spoof on the Star Wars series. And there was some big, I can't remember what it was, they were going to asteroid field or whatever. I think they were spoofing that moment. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so dangerous, we're going to die. And I think Peter says, look, we've got 4 or 5 of the main characters on this ship. I'm pretty sure we're going to be fine. So there's that idea of like the main character effect, like the main character is going to make it through. But I mean, that's literally in the Bible. That's what Paul says. He's like, I'm supposed to be in, like, I know 2 scenes down, I'm going to be in Rome. So I'm not going to die here because
Right, I'm
I'm
not
going
gonna die on the
to Rome.
ship. Yeah.
Right, right. So, I mean, so I don't know. That's part of the Bible, and I would say that, I think that is part of life. I think that you, there's no reason to think that you're not the main character, other than, we kind of can't comprehend exactly what that means. When people think I am the main character and other people are not, other people are NPCs, that's a problem.
Hmm.
But the point is, God is infinite and he gives each person the attention and the possibility and the care that any director would give a main character in their story. So, in a sense, everybody's a main character. That doesn't make sense from our point of view because we watch movies with one main character. But in life, amidst the infinite of God and his never-ending story, each character has equal value from God's point of view. Let's put it that way. Um, and so then it's like, well, the story is written for me. Like I am a pivotal starring role in my own story. And like you said, when you accept the director's decisions and cooperate with his directions and follow his lead, then you start to see more and more um, his blessings, the good part of having the director on your side. Now, that's not to say, again, we go back to the idea of what kind of video game are we playing? What kind of movie are we watching? We're not watching Rob sits in a fluffy room and eats candy for 40 years, and nothing bad happens to him. His teeth don't fall out. We're watching the story of Earth. And like you're going to be put through difficulty. There's difficulty, there's challenge for sure. So it's not like everything just works out for you because you have the director on your side, but in the things that are difficult, you have the director on your side. And I think um, I think that's the view that we're supposed to take. And it does stand opposed to this idea of, well, someone else can be so powerful and so orchestrate things that they force you into, you know, basically what making a deal with the devil, right? Or abandoning your own virtues and principles in order to satisfy the little game that they've set up. Uh, and not most people don't have a supervillain coming up to them and twirling their mustache and be like, ah, you have to choose. But we do go through life and we feel like our hands kind of being forced and we're doing things that we would rather not do, but we think it's necessary for this moment. And I think that would change if we looked at it more like a superhero looks at it and said, there's got to be some other way. There's got to be something I can do that escapes this supposed evil binary.
Right. And I think we're let's say utilitarianists will come into play is when you think that you're the author, and so you engage in a behavior and the outcome doesn't occur as you want it to. So you experience a level of resistance and you think that it's punishment. When many times down the line you realize that that was the best decision to bring forth something else. But in the
Mhm.
moment, I think it kind of, that level of resistance pushes people more into the camp of utilitarianist, where it's like, okay, I can't rely on something that is presenting itself as an obstacle. Therefore, I need to do everything within my power to make the change that I deem fit, right? So
Mhm.
you look at a character like Thanos, who through logic and reasoning brought forth this idea that, well, if I kill, 1 billion people here, that's going to save 6 or 7 billion people over here. And
Mhm.
so it's my responsibility to then ensure that this comes forth
Right.
rather than
Right.
allowing the narrative to play out. And that always has a tendency to get that confirmation feedback of every time you do that, things tend not to work out in that person's favor. And that's why we always see the villains embody that level of utilitarianism where they want to bring forth their idea, their message. They're the author, they're Sylvester Stallone doing a Rocky movie where he's a screenwriter, he's the director, he's the actor, all these things.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily the case. So every time you engage in that behavior that you think is right and you don't get that feedback, that not only is an embodiment of most villains that we see in modern media, but then it also brings forth a sense of cynicism as well, right? Which then perpetuates that villainous behavior because you're never getting what you want because you're always fighting against the grain.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's how would that then tie in? Because another aspect of the chapter was relativism. That was the second part of the chapter. Does that level of cynicism that could be found in utilitarianism and potentially relativism, would that be something that both of them have in common? I know that there's a difference in that relativism has a similarity with potential and kind of chaos and bringing forth something out of nothing, because you're not necessarily grounded in anything specific. But I think that that idea of cynicism permeates both. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. They're both cynical. They're opposites in many ways, but so just starting with utilitarianism, you said it well, where the utilitarian, believes they have the responsibility to make whatever they see happen. And that sort of just goes hand in hand with like once you're a full utilitarian, you're gonna believe that because in order to be a utilitarian, you have to believe you've understood everything and
Mm.
accounted for it correctly. Like maybe you could be like a quasi-utilitarian where you think this is a useful-ish pattern of thought, but you never think you're certain enough to actually act on it. Okay, but then you're not a utilitarian. If you're a utilitarian, you believe in the utilitarian formula. You believe you can calculate what is good and what is best. And then you have to have all the parameters mapped out and you have to have all the factors accounted for. So once you believe that and you believe you see what is best, then that entails that, like, just hand in hand, the next step is, okay, I've accounted for everything. I know what's best. Now I have to do what's best.
Mm.
So I have to do what I've concluded. So the there comes a responsibility to enact the idea, even though usually the ideas are wacky or very dark. So the utilitarian has this finite view of the world because they believe they can account for it within their mind. And then on top of that, they have, again, I mean, it's sort of the same thing, but the other side of the coin, the arrogance to believe that they've accounted for everything and correctly calculated everything. And that aspect of it is the opposite of relativism, because relativism kind of has the idea, well, it's all this infinite chaos jumble, and there's no overarching unifying principles, values, understanding, ethos, whatever it is. There's no overlying eternal value set. So they're opposites in those ways, but the utilitarian is like, what would you say? Like authoritarianly cynical. They're just, we know what to do. We need to be in control, and that's all there is to it. It doesn't matter how many heads get squashed in the way because we have calculated what's best. And then the relativist is in a sea of chaos and it's like, well, there's nothing for it. I mean, that's the true relativist would just be like, well, there's nothing for it. And then it's all depressing and chaos and we fight and bicker about stuff that doesn't ultimately matter. And we're all misunderstanding each other. And I'm the one who understands why we're misunderstanding each other, but it all sucks anyways. And there's no point and we die. That'd be the true relativist with some degree of integrity. But generally, relativism, uh, you're in that sea of chaos, and then you will look for a way out. So then you look for the sort of uh, arbitrarily imposed overarching order to stabilize the chaos. So anyhow, they're connected in both being pessimistic, cynical points of view, and then also the idea of relativism is closely connected to the idea of interpreting stories in general, because I mean, this is a popular trope, the what if series, like what if the good guy was the bad guy? Um, what if the main character was the opposite gender, whatever it is, or what if we looked at the story through the lens of the villain, and then we saw the heroes as evil, and so there's all these ideas of, well, you know, we can just reinterpret a story as many ways as possible, and it's still just as valid as anything else. And so that idea kind of, we can seem like we're in the territory of relativism as we're talking about the idea of we're living a story and it's an infinite story, and we're fallible and all that sort of stuff. That all seems to give, excuse me, seems to give fertile ground to relativism. Utilitarianism is kind of way out the window once you realize life's infinite and you're fallible. It's like you can't calculate reality. Just stop.
Right.
And especially you can't calculate what good is, since good inherently incorporates your conscious experience and valuation. So that's just a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow.
Right. Yeah, I think that's you know, I think too, and I don't know if I heard this somewhere, but I think like 2000 years from now, are people going to look at these superhero stories and say like, oh, that's what they believed in? I
Right.
just wonder that, if I mean today, clearly they're fiction, of course, but it's like looking back and saying, did the Greeks and the Romans, did they view their gods as we view God, or did they view their gods more like, how we view modern day superheroes? Kind of,
Right.
you know, it's an interesting point. Also, the idea of relativism in its importance of providing variance, providing the ability to see things differently, I think is really important. You know, there's that level of it where it allows you to think outside the box, but without if it's unchecked or if like you said, there's no overarching foundation, there's no structure, there's no cohesion involved. It left unchecked, it's its own thing. It just kind of unfolds on its on its own with just chaos and not again. Well, what if this was this? What if that was this? It's like okay, fine, yeah, yeah, maybe, but let's bring it back to center a little bit and anchor ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the divine order really brings forth. It's like the Ten Commandments. It's a very strong structure, things that you should do, things that you should not do. Um, and then of course over time, that's like kind of the trunk of the tree. And then you have these
Yeah.
branches that come out that I think could be an embodiment of relativism to an extent. But again, everything is tied back to that overarching structure that is the trunk of the tree.
Yeah, sometimes I'll use it interchangeably, but I do try to emphasize in my writing that the problem is with ultimate relativism.
Right,
When you
right.
believe that relativism is the core of reality, it all the way down describes the basic nature of all reality, that there is no underlying foundation. That is really the problem. Just the fact that some things, or I don't know, all you could say all created things. I don't know, but that relativism as a lower principle has reality in the world, I think is just true. Like
Mhm.
there are things that are different between us and we're going to experience them relatively differently. And when you were talking about the tree, I think about, you take the Ten Commandments and you can apply them all in a certain, along a branch, and that can look a certain way. Another branch theoretically could apply them all the same Ten Commandments, but they could have, there could be these different cultures that grow out of that and look different, but they're still
Right.
supported by the same structure. So there
Sure.
is relativism as a subordinate lower thing of just variety. And then we as humans stumble over that because we get confused. We're like, well, you need to worship Jesus. And it's like, oh, okay, yes. And you need to, what? You need to make sure that you eat red meat because only soy boy liberals are vegetarians and vegans. And it's like, maybe that's a little bit more relative because there's a lot of people, in throughout history who were not the modern, whatever, castrated males that were vegetarians and were, for valid reasons. And even in Uh, there's some case to be made from the Bible for at least a certain amount of vegetarianism. Even Paul says, meat's not that important. Like if you have a choice between helping someone and like helping them to the faith and eating meat, you should definitely go vegetarian. Like
Right.
it's not a big deal. So, anyways, we have a hard time parsing what is that real trunk and then even seeing it like in its outgrowth. Is it something that's just different from us and they're still embodying all the appropriate things, or are they missing key elements and perverting things? We can't see that perfectly. So we do experience relativism on our level. The real problem is just relativism as a foundational ultimate philosophy. That's where you really run into the evils of relativism.
Right. I agree. I agree. Well, Rob, that was kind of a shorter chapter. Then I would recommend that everybody go on Rob's website and look at that essay, "Superheroes versus Utilitarianists," as it not only ties in with this chapter, but is a really good uh, just overview and a different look into such a popular phenomena such as superheroes. And maybe you'll be able to derive some deeper meaning. So next time you watch Black Panther, you watch Captain America, you'll be able to get a little bit more out of it. Rob, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on within this chapter?
Not within the chapter. I'll just say that I've got on my Substack, I've now finished the book and have it completely up of living under controlled abundance. And
Okay.
I've also uploaded nearly everything that I'm going to upload in the Defund the Fun Police project. I recently uploaded the complete unedited recordings of the meetings that I had with some professors who uh, had an issue with me not being a communist, essentially.
Yeah.
So I uploaded those in my Substack for people to listen to and get the unedited context on their own. My writing is about the context and how I would argue you should listen and understand it, but I also uploaded the uh, raw material for people to interpret on their own. So the vast majority of what I'm planning on putting up outside of a full published book at some point, theoretically, that's all up there on my Substack. So I think if for people who are interested, it's all there. I'm not missing anything at this point.
Yeah, go check it out. I mean, if you're late to the party, the good news is that you don't have to wait every week now. It's
Right.
all up there now at once. And although there was that feeling of eager anticipation waiting for the next episode of something to come up, which I think is a big part of it. It's something to enjoy. The other side of it though is you get all of this incredible material in one go. You can binge read it. And next week we are going over chapter 18. We're coming towards the end here. Chapter 18, the Christian doctrine and the Gettier problem of knowledge. And I've done a little bit of perusing of that chapter already, and it ties in very well with with this last chapter. Um, Also, I'd like to do a shout out to a couple of those other essays that you recommend or that you sent to me that we did in the past couple episodes based on Star Wars, which really shed some light into, why do some Jedi fall into the allure of the dark side? So if you're not only a fan of the superhero genre, but you're also a fan of the science fiction or science, I guess that would be science fantasy. Uh, is that right? Is that the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars? One is fantasy and one is I don't know,
Somewhat
irrelevant.
subjective.
Yeah,
It's
somewhat
relative.
subjective. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Perfect example of that. Go ahead and check that out. Um, all of Rob's works can be found on his website, which there's a link to in the description below. There's also a link in that same description below to his book, Purpose and Form, The Necessary Basis of All Ethics that we've been going through. If you were to go on Amazon.com and check the search bar, you would have to type in Purpose and Form along with Robert B. Davis's second in order for it to come up, or just click on that link below and you'd be able to get that book sent directly to your house. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and we will see you next week. God bless, and may peace be with you.